Hi, we're talking about Your Money Matters on NDTV Profit, and my name is Alex Matthew. When it comes to investments, often you look at the returns, but you look at the returns before you consider tax and certainly before you consider cost. And this is not something of a criticism, it is just the reality of how most people approach their investments. But is there a question to be asked here? Can you construct a low-cost, high-efficiency portfolio using the passive route? Some people have said yes, but let's dive a little deeper into that question. Joining me to talk about the options available to you in the Indian market is Prableen Bajpai, the founder of FinFix Research and Analytics. Prableen, thanks so much for taking the time as always, and good evening to you. Let me ask you this. Has the passive industry in the mutual fund space come of age? And the extension to that is, are there enough options available to construct a fully passive portfolio?
Hi, Alex. Good evening. With more than 650 schemes, I think there are enough options for available to investors to actually create an all-passive portfolio. If you're looking at the AUM industry-wise, passives are now at 17% of the overall industry of mutual funds, which is, I think, quite encouraging. The overall AUM currently is around 14 lakh crores, which I think has increased tremendously, especially since 2019. It's almost 6.4 times in rise in the assets which are held. So overall, absolutely a lot of choice available to investors, especially post-COVID, Alex. We've seen the rise in the number of NFOs which were launched, which are catering to the passive space. We've seen passive fund launches, not only in the equity space, but debt, gold, silver is something which is, relatively recent. Of course, international investing. So I think across regions, across market cap, across different categories, there is a huge variety. And there's an interesting survey, recent survey by Motilal, which actually gives us an indication of how and where passive stand in mutual fund portfolios of investors. And this survey is based on roughly about 3,000 representatives. So it's a sample size of 3,000 and about 120 wealth advisors, including SEBI-registered advisors and distributors. And that says that 68% people who were surveyed, they actually say that they have one passive fund in their portfolio, which is very interesting. And 76% say that they've heard of ETFs and index funds, but which also leaves us with 24% who haven't heard of passive investing. So I think, yes, there is a rise, and it's no ways a fringe or a very, it's not on the sidelines, it's becoming mainstream. So passives are definitely here with the bank and continue. I think it will just get stronger, the inflows and the presence in portfolios.
Yeah, let's talk about some of those options in the equity space, right? Because the question a lot of people have is it representative of wide enough basket? Your traditional options that people have gravitated towards is the Nifty 50 or the Sensex, and now increasingly the Nifty Next 50 is what people are going towards. But what about the broader markets?
Absolutely, Alex. There is enough availability in terms of schemes which cater to not only the large caps, which is the Nifty 50 and Next 50, but also the mid cap. In fact, within mid caps alone, there are 3 different indices which are now available to investors. One is the mid cap 50 index. The next is the mid cap 100 index, the Nifty 100 index, and the Nifty 150 mid cap index. So 3 within the basket of mid caps. And if we are looking down the market cap and we are looking at small caps, then we have the Nifty Small Cap 50 available. We have the Nifty Small Cap 250 available. And of course, it is also a small cap, but how it is categorized in terms of an index is the micro cap. So we also have the micro cap 250 index available. So I think enough availability. We have so many of these different beta strategies which are coming up. So I don't think there's any dearth in terms of availability of products. It's out there, but of course, how a portfolio needs to be constructed and whether an investor would stick to it, because there is so much of activity in the active fund space as well. That is a question, very important question.
So therefore, let me ask you about construction. And ultimately, we're talking about the pros and cons of having an all-passive portfolio. The big pro, of course, is the cost factor, right? And there could be a huge difference. You're talking about maybe a percentage point of difference between an active and a passive fund, right? But can you have a core versus satellite allocation that you arguably are able to construct with an active option? And here we're talking about core as in something that is stable, and satellite, which will give you the alpha in your portfolio.
So core, Alex, we all understand that core and satellite together, which is, dividing your portfolio into two parts where, like you said, that the large part of your portfolio is the more stable options that you have, which is something that you can hold for the long term, 20, 30 years as well. And then the satellite is more of your tactical call, something that you would want to invest in and then eventually exit and, look at slightly riskier options there. So that's the satellite part. Of course, within passives, a combination of creating a core and satellite is totally possible, because within the core, we can, of course, add the mid caps, we can add the large caps, and to some extent, the small cap also becomes a part of your core, because in a very long-term portfolio, small cap should be part of the core. Along with that, I think commodities in form of gold, and as well as some debt products can be creating your core. And in the satellite, there are enough number of passive funds now which cover different themes. They are covering different sectors. For example, the defense index is there, bank index, there is the pharma index. So many of these schemes are tracking these different indices, whether it is the IT or even consumption for that matter. So there is definitely enough scope for any sort of a satellite and core portfolio to be constructed. But at the same time, Alex, because you just touched upon costs, and there is a huge variation in cost, because that does result in a compounding factor. But within, and we're only talking about direct schemes, so direct index and direct active funds. Within those, the variation is really stark, because, of course, any passive fund would bring down the cost because it's just about 10 paisa to 40 paisa, let's say. But within the actively managed funds, if we are just looking at the mid caps, the variation is like from, 0.30 paisa, 30 paisa to almost 2 rupee, 100 rupee, basically 2%, that means. So not necessarily that every index also will always bring in a very, very low cost. There are some actively managed funds also which are actually having a low cost. And I think in India, we investors, when they're looking at core and satellite, can actually look at a combination of active and passive as well to construct this sort of a portfolio.
Yeah, I mean, that argument is a strong one to make, particularly because you have schemes that are 60, 70, 80,000 crore in assets under management, and the requirement by SEBI is to have the lower expense ratio as you go up in the assets under management, right? So Parag Parikh, if I'm not mistaken, is over 1 lakh crore, and therefore 0.7, 70 basis points or so. On the direct side, I'll have to check that. Maybe you can remember.
I think lesser than that. In fact, lesser than that on the direct side.
Yeah, so it's pretty low. All right. So the question therefore is, if you are to use passive even in your debt, and you mentioned silver and gold ETFs, should you do that?
So debt, of course, I think, Alex, target maturity funds are one of the best options to utilize when you have a you have the clarity that this is what I'm investing in, and I need the money after 5 years or 10 years, because you have a maturity date. So I think within debt, target maturity funds are a great space to be. There are more than 100 schemes available to investors. A bit of their charm is taken away by the change in the taxation, but I think they still become very remain relevant, because there is deferred taxation. There is a lot of prediction in terms of what sort of returns you can get from the debt scheme. The expense, like you mentioned, is really low. It's just about 10 pesos, 15 pesos somewhere. So you still have liquidity. And the underlying holdings are mostly government securities, state development loans, and PSU bonds. So I think a debt definitely is a very interesting space. And you also have the without maturity sort of passive funds, which are the gilt funds, which are open-ended, and there is no timeline on the maturity, and they're open, but they cover a certain period of the gilt holdings. For example, 8-year holding to 13-year holding kind of case would be there. And likewise for gold and silver. So for gold and silver, there is no active option as it is. So passives is the only way forward. But investors shouldn't jump onto it, because, like gold and silver has really, really moved up so much that that requires a bit of caution that you're not taking, chasing the returns.
Yeah, don't chase returns, but then this is something that you can fit into your portfolio construction for the long term. I do want to ask you about final strategy, because there's also smart beta funds. Would that fit into your satellite portfolio? And if I were to ask you to construct a portfolio for somebody, and you were to suggest options, not necessarily for everybody to do, and obviously everyone does their own research, how would it look?
So smart beta, Alex, I think that's a very, very interesting space. And what we do is that you apply certain filters to a basic index that we see on the news, and we track is the Nifty 50 in the mid caps. We usually look at the mid cap 150 index. But let's say we apply certain filters such as momentum or quality value are applied. Then you have these variations. So the parent is like Nifty 50, but then you have offshoots where these variations are there. And these are smart beta strategies. So I think I'll say that smart beta strategies in certain cases can actually be part of your core as well. And I'll give you two examples. I'll give one example for the large caps. I would say that within the large caps, if you're exploring Nifty 50, and there you must look at the counterpart, which is the Nifty 50 equal weight, because it gives you diversification across top 50 companies, but in equal proportion. And in terms of returns, Alex, in the last 5 years, Nifty 50 has given us 12.58% returns. SIP returns I'm mentioning here. Nifty 50 equal weight has given us 16.07% returns. So it's a decent outperformance. And over 8 years, because the equal weight index is only 8.5 years old. So over 8 years, Nifty 50 has given us 13.69% returns, but equal weight has given us 16.65% returns. So it's a simple basic strategy to invest in the top 50 in equal proportion. And likewise, for the mid caps, you have the momentum index and the quality index. And again, their momentum index has topped, it has beaten the mid cap 150 and the quality. There are times, different time periods, 5, 8, 10 and 15 years, and we have data up to 15 years there, Alex, where 150 and momentum have interchangeably done well. So if I have to create a portfolio for the very long term, and it has to be all passive, and then I'll go with 4 schemes, I would go with equal weight index for the large caps, because it's a value centric approach. I would go add momentum in the mid caps, because then it's giving me exposure to the momentum strategy. For the market cap based strategy, I would go with the micro cap 250, and I will add gold along with it. So 4 schemes.
Fantastic. All right. And it's low cost. It's something that is holistic in the approach. And of course, if you want to throw in, and you're focused on the low cost approach, you can throw in a few of the larger active managed funds, which have proved their track record over a period of time. But do keep an eye on the cost as well, because that makes a big difference. And Prableen mentioned that the compounding over a period of time makes a huge difference, especially when you hit that 1 crore mark, which I hope a lot of you will hit over the course of the coming years. Prableen, thanks so much for taking the time. Pleasure speaking with you as always.
Alex, I'll just add one thing here, that while we, cost is a very important thing, but there's this advertisement which I want to mention, and it says that जब महंगे दाम वाली क्वालिटी सफेदी और झाग कम दाम में मिले तो कोई ये क्यों ले वो क्यों ना ले. So index can definitely fit into that definition, but there are for active funds, I think if they're able to justify the fee, then definitely I think it should be a mix of active and passive.
But for those people, probably the counter argument to that is that you have to pick and choose the active fund to win as well, right?
Yes, absolutely.
That is where an issue comes. And of course, that is why people come to people like you, distributors and advisors that give the right advice. But if you're doing it yourself and you want to erase that from the possibility of the problem of choice, if you want to remove that from the equation, then passive is the way to go. Prableen, thanks so much for taking the time.